Good day, everyone. Today, our session is, did technology save the events industry? And as you know, COVID devastated the events industry in 2020, but within months, the industry as a whole came together to find common solutions to a global problem. The multi-billion-dollar industry completely transformed its main business model and moved to virtual. Today, we're going to talk about what lessons were learned and what we can apply for going forward into the industry. And I have two industry experts here, Anissa Cook, as well as Caroline Hicks, that can introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their background and what challenges and innovations that they did with their events going forward. My background as the moderator for today is, my name is Mark Hubrick, and I'm a serial entrepreneur in the events technology space. I've been working with the events industry for the last 20 years in the event registration area and have done two startups, which have both been successfully merged in with other companies. So it's been an exciting journey for me to learn about the technology space and continually be innovative to address the needs of the industry. Anissa, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely. I'm Anissa Cook, and I am with SymBioBeta. I'm the Director of Operations. Been there for just shy of 3 years now. And we are a media company, an innovation network for synthetic biology, and we put on multiple events a year, in person and virtual. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about this with you guys. Caroline?
Thank you, Anissa. So I'm Caroline Hicks. I'm the Portfolio Director for the Automotive Group at Informa Tech. So we're part of Informa PLC. And the Automotive Group, we run before COVID, we ran a series of in-person events, primarily in Detroit, Germany and Japan. And obviously we've pivoted just like everyone else has. So our event lineup for the last 8 months or so has been exclusively virtual. And we're planning towards the hopeful return of hybrid events or physical events in 2021 and beyond.
So it's a pleasure to have you both here today. You both have firsthand experience in multiple virtual events over the past year. What are your thoughts of how technology saved the events industry's respective audiences?
So I'll jump in here, Mark. I think technology, it did a lot to mitigate the damage of COVID-19. I'm not sure it's fair to say it completely saved the industry. I think it's forced innovation, and it's been one part of a potential solution. Obviously, as you said, COVID has devastated the events industry. We still have, certainly in the UK and Europe, a huge number of people on furlough. There's obviously a lot of people who have sadly lost their jobs. And I think technology has played a part. I don't think it's solved the problem entirely, but it has been a big part of the solution for allowing events to continue in some form.
Yeah, and for us, with our events, we've always done kind of both in person and virtual events. And so what we had to do, for us, tech did save a lot of it. We were already involved in a lot of the technology, including SwapCard, which was a great platform for us to utilize. But we wanted to start thinking outside the box to how to use these different technologies. There was already things in place. For example, everybody, gets Zoom and Google Hangouts and Teams and things like that. So it was nice for us to be able to look outside that typical standard box of technology and find other platforms to engage with our audience.
Well, great. I know it has been very challenging, and it's been interesting to say the least. What specific aspects of the technology that didn't exist before March really saved your events?
I can go first. So for us for this, we are an innovation network first and foremost, and the biggest thing about our events is going to be the networking for us. And so we had to find ways, new and unique ways for us to be able to have people to have those meetings. People love the kind of serendipitous meetings that you get at an in-person conference, bumping into somebody at a coffee cart or meeting somebody at a happy hour. And so our goal was to find other ways for people to have those same type of experiences close to as an in-person experience, short of actually being there, able to shake hands and hug each other. So for us, like I said before, there was a lot of stuff that did exist for us, but now taking that to the next level to find other ways for our audience to engage, platforms like High Fidelity, Rally, Hopin, and then again, of Swap Card. So a lot of great platforms out there for different ways to engage.
I think for us, we had a definite split between our physical events, and we'd use apps for those physical events if they were big enough, and then we had our webinars. And I think it's not so much that it didn't exist. I think it's just that we were not thinking about events in a virtual space to the extent that we are now. And so the elements of community engagement and content delivery virtually, as well as the networking stuff that Anissa touched on, are all features. Bringing that all together in one place is a slightly different proposition to how we were using technology to augment what we were doing before COVID hit.
How are you currently using the technology, or specifically around networking, for your events?
Anissa, do you want to go first?
Sure. For the networking piece, I can give you an example of a platform. I won't name drop it, but we have the ability for roundtable discussions, for example. It was really great to get out of the normal face-to-face Zoom, type of interaction with people, and be able to be in a room with people where you can kind of still have a stage, as well as then drop into your own table discussions. And so, that was one way that they could interact. Another platform that we were using and still currently use gives the ability of standing in a room, like a mixer, for example, where you can walk around the room and you can hear people, talking over here, people talking over here, and having the ability to, kind of just jump in on conversations, but not feel like you're interrupting them, for example. But being able, and even those ones have the ability to turn on video if you want to. So it's almost like you're physically standing in a room with somebody, having that kind of 3D hearing. It's just incredible that the technology that companies have come out with, the AI, for the ability to connect people based on interests. We've got like 3 or 4 different ones that we've been using to try to mix it up, because we just don't want the same stale, thing happening all the time where people get bored. Because let's face it, we're all getting bored sitting in front of a Zoom meeting all day long. We want to get it changed up and keep them interested and keep them excited.
Yeah, we've found that the networking side of virtual events has been one of the more challenging aspects as people have got used to virtual events and COVID's kept on developing. I think people are not quite as keen, perhaps, as they were, say, last June. So we've had to really think about the focus of the networking. We found that one-on-one networking, people will do that if they are keen enough to put the effort in to facilitate it themselves. But on a group networking perspective, we found things like general happy hour chats that you would do at a physical event where it's just a drinks reception doesn't necessarily translate all that well online. But we found if we make them focused, so it's a networking session, but it's around a particular topic, and maybe there are 2 or 3 questions that people are specifically going to be asked, and that gives them the introduction to kind of start the conversation. We found that works better in a virtual environment because people are either tired or shy. And so you get a lot of people in the room, but a lot of people have their cameras off or they have their microphones off. So we've also found that having a couple of plants as such, so people that we know who don't work for us, but are a big part of our community, if we can guarantee that they're going to be there and we can ask them to start the conversation, there's very much a snowball effect. Once it gets going, it becomes better, but getting it going is much more difficult in a virtual environment than in a physical one, I think.
And I can 100% agree with that, Caroline, because we tried it both ways. I think in the beginning we were just like, yay, people want interaction, let's create a mixer or something, and then they show up, or some people don't show up because they feel nervous, like, oh, if I go in there I'm gonna have to talk. And so we kind of created these kind of birds of a feather kind of, things where, like you said, specific topics where people can gravitate to because they have, the knowledge of that subject matter, and they can feel confident in the conversations that they're going to have. So
exactly,
yeah, 100% agree with that's a very important factor.
Yeah. Otherwise, you end up spending a lot of time talking about the weather at people's various locations, and that's
weather, vacations. Yeah,
right. It's just it gets a bit cringy. So yeah, you've got to put that focus on it. And on a one-to-one front, I think that something that we get asked quite a lot from the sponsor perspective of sponsored meetings or exhibitors being able to have meetings with attendees. Again, we found that doing the work there for the sponsor, it's a different kind of approach to a physical event. They need to do a lot more pre-work, opening the platform early, having an idea for each sales team of what it is they're looking to achieve and who they're looking to talk to within the event rather than just everybody. We've spent quite a lot of time educating the sales teams at our vendors or the BD teams about how they should interact with the platforms and making it clear that it's kind of like LinkedIn. If you send 200 of the same message to 200 people, your results probably aren't going to be as good. But if you send 15 tailored messages to the right people with real clarity around why you want to speak to them and why you think it would be useful for them, it's likely that your results will be higher in the end.
Yes, agreed.
That's great. That's a great process. What did the technology change in terms of accessibility to high-level speakers for the attendees when things went virtual? How do you feel that impacted?
That that was actually a really great thing for us. We kind of hit the nail on the head with our first event out the gate when we did our first virtual, our first big virtual, outside of our in-person event. And for us, what we did was, we wanted to do a lot of our pre-recorded sessions. We didn't want to have a lot of hiccups with the live, streaming and whatnot. So what we did is something that attendees don't get at an in-person event. They do their presentation on stage and then they're gone. And really, if there's no Q&A, there's no real interactivity. With our virtual events, we specifically designed the session so that there would be like 30-minute panels, for example, with a 15-minute live Q&A with the speakers. So this was something that the attendees have never had access to, these high-level CEOs, these industry thought leaders or KOLs, and having the ability to ask questions, these burning questions that they've always had that, they would never otherwise be able to get in front of these people and find out what their thoughts are on those specific questions. So for us, it was really exciting, and we did it really well on the first one. So of course we've continued it with everyone. And when we do our survey after every event, that is the number one, if not the number two thing that the attendees say is the excitement around having access to those speakers. I don't know, Caroline, is it kind of similar for you guys?
Yeah, pretty similar. We did the Meet the Speaker sessions. I think we've realized we've made a couple of tweaks. Initially we were kind of like you, Anissa, we were quite gung-ho, like, we can do a Meet the Speaker after every presentation to give everyone the chance to access every speaker on an individual level. And then we sort of reverse engineered it from there and thought, hang on, at our physical events, do we get a question after every single presentation? Not always. Doesn't mean the speaker's bad, but it doesn't always happen. So if you ask a speaker to go into a room and then they don't really get any questions virtually, it's a lot more obvious. So we've kind of tweaked it a little bit. I think the access to the keynote speakers is really important, and having that opportunity through a one speaker in the room, multiple question askers, works really well. And then we've also found putting speakers together in groups, perhaps around content types, and getting them to host sessions that way also works really well.
Great idea. Yeah.
I think there's a real difference between live content and pre-recorded content as well. I think, Anissa, as you said, if someone's pre-recorded their presentation, if you can have them be there asking questions and answering them in the chat box, and then possibly have a live Meet the Speaker session afterwards, essentially it means that people don't always notice that it wasn't live in the first place. So exactly. It gives you that opportunity as well to offset some of the stress of doing your event fully live, but they don't lose the value of meeting the speaker.
Absolutely. And yeah, we do that. Definitely. That's one thing we require of our speakers, is to be present during the presentation, to interact with the audience during the recording. And then, like you said, you're mentioning that, the worry of nobody asking a question. We always try to, plant a person with a question to kind of get the conversation started, or, we have volunteers that are always in our sessions, and they're keeping track of questions that are asked. So they may pose that question in the chat box to get the conversation started. So things like that, to help keep it interactive.
It's exactly that. It's like the facilitation element of virtual events it's not more important than physical, but I don't think things happen as naturally virtually. So yeah, having any kind of facilitation for every session, I think, is important to have thought about in advance.
Yeah, that sounds like a great best practice. Have you had any challenges around the profitability for sponsors at virtual events compared to the traditional events?
You want to go first?
Sure. I think, yes, is the short answer. I think there's several factors here. One, which I think is becoming less common now, but initially the definition of a virtual event could really vary depending upon the experience of people prior to COVID or just in the first couple of weeks of COVID. Not everybody is running a virtual event in the same way. Not everyone's using the same platform. So we had quite a lot of sponsors who would off the bat say, no, we're not really interested because we've done some and they were terrible. So then we had to do quite a lot of education work around, I think it's fairly obvious we use SwapCard, around why we were using SwapCard, how it was different to, say, a series of webinars without any networking, the level of intelligence you get and what the benefits of virtual events were. And sort of, I think focusing on that has helped, because that helps you create some language with your sponsor around where they will find the value in virtual events and how it's different to the value that they might find in physical events. Some sponsors were not very receptive to it, and their KPIs for how they spend money and where their return is are very physical event focused, and so some of them just kind of out of the game for the foreseeable because of that. But I think once you've pointed out the data that you get and you've done the demonstration, and again you have to put a bit more work in, but we found that has been helpful because it helps us understand if a sponsor has, firstly, a realistic understanding of what it is that they might get from a virtual event and the work that they'll need to put in to get that. And it helps us understand for them what success looks like, and therefore how we can help them facilitate that.
Absolutely. And I think I could echo almost everything you just said. And what I would add to that is, you talked about, hand holding and making sure that they're making the best use of it. But one thing that I had the advantage of is with our main big event in October, and, all this started in March, and we weren't sure, are we going to have an event? Are we not going to have an event, and going out throughout the year? But all these other little virtual events were happening throughout the year. And every time I would reach out, because I have regular touch points with my sponsors, and I would ask them, how did that event go? What did you like about it, that event? What didn't you like about that event? Because then I'm taking all those nuggets to make sure that I do or don't do those things at my event. So I felt like I had a little bit of an advantage to make my event that much better than what they experienced, because there was a lot of, virtual events, we're tired of being on Zoom, we're tired of this, we're not getting the lead generation we want, our booth doesn't get much traffic, so on and so on. So it was a matter of, okay, what can we do to give them that ROI that we're looking for? And a lot of it was hand holding, of course, because platforms, they're not used to it. Like you said, multiple platforms that they're on, and you wanted to give them the best chance with the platform that we were using.
And so how important would you say it is for engagement of the sponsors and attendees pre-event to prepare them for the virtual conference?
Anissa, you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting because we're kind of alluding to that right now as we've been talking, but for these events, everything, it's different when you're at an in-person event. We all know, you tell them, okay, you're going to be in booth 166, and they show up with their stuff. They get everything set up, kind of autonomous. They just do their thing, and they're going to do it. But in this environment, booths are virtual. They're like landing pages basically, and they have the ability to, just like they would at an in-person booth, to put up their products and maybe have a video in the background and pamphlets and whatever they want to hand out. But having to hand hold them through every bit of that process to make sure their pages are like, I'd never have to walk over to a booth in person and be like, oh, you forgot to put your PDF or your paper on your table. But here I am in our virtual world going, hey, you have an ad that you can use. You can set up a video. You can have a banner. You can have a background. You can, there's so many things that you can use. And then teaching them, how to use the networking. Caroline, you mentioned earlier about the sales teams. It's the same thing as how are your sales teams engaging with the audience before the event even happens? Are you setting up the face-to-face meetings? Things that you don't have to do in an in-person event, you're having to put that extra time into, but they appreciate that, because it's things that they haven't had to think about, but with our experience in the more events we put on, we're realizing where they're lacking and the things that they've said about other events that haven't worked for them, and then giving them that knowledge, giving them the training, multiple touch points, looking at their landing page, have you made sure they've got their sponsored session showing on their page. I mean, depending on the platform, of course, every platform is different. I'm referring to SwapCard right now, but there's just a lot more that I feel like we need to do to help them get engaged with the audience, the speakers to get engaged with the audience, and then overall ROI and lead generation that they're trying to get. It's more work, but I think it's worth it. And again, they appreciate that, because I hate the idea of, sometimes in-person events, you feel like you give them they give you a check for the event and then you're like, okay, see you in October kind of idea. And I hate that. I do love the multiple touch points in that relationship building. Builds more trust with your sponsor.
Yeah, I think it's essentially everything that Anissa said, that particularly on the booth front, virtual booths, when you do a physical booth at a show, they have a lot of control over how it's designed, what it looks like. There's multiple different things that they can do. And then the traffic that comes past their booth, people come to them because, they're there and they're obvious. It's not quite the same in the virtual world. So one of the things that I think we've put a lot of time and effort into on the sponsor education is that they need to have content that is generated that can be downloaded. Like, that is how they're going to get their leads, particularly if they're not involved in the content of your virtual event. So they're not on the agenda, they're not doing a presentation or a panel or anything like that. If they have a static booth where there's not much that you can do to interact with it, then they're unlikely to see the kind of return that they're probably looking for. But obviously they've got to generate that content far in advance so that it's there and it's ready to be put up and downloaded, and then they've got to educate their sales teams about how to follow up on it and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's different things that you just need to make sure that they're doing, and sometimes it's that thing of never assume, because you might think they understand it and then 3 days before the event you go in and they've got a badly pixelated logo on the top of their booth, and that's kind of all they've done. So having conversations as in advance as you possibly can and making it clear what they need to do is helpful. And then on the delegate front, we have found that ideally we open for the sponsors about 2 weeks before we open for attendees, and we try and open for attendees at least 2 weeks before the event starts, because again, the more that we can do to save time for them on the day, the better. So we've done, thinking a lot around what content is available on demand that people can watch before the event starts. So giving people reasons to log in. And it means you have to think differently about your content strategy, but it is definitely worth it in the end, because if someone's been in before the event starts, they don't spend the first hour that they're at the event when they should be at the keynote trying to work out how to send a message to somebody. Or trying to find out where they're going to find this, that, and the other. So we've also done a lot of, I loathe doing this, but recording oneself. So welcome videos that tell you where everything is, how to get to the help desk, all of that kind of stuff. So we have spent quite a lot of time from a marketing perspective trying to get the number of engaged and logged in attendees up before the day of the event itself.
And I know this is kind of a tangent thing, but I'll just say this really quick. I cannot stress enough the importance to the audience that's listening right now, if this is something that you're doing and you're interested in, is getting the speakers, not just the sponsors, but the speakers engaged in the platform well beforehand. Because I cannot tell you how many times, day of, sometimes minutes before they're supposed to be in their sessions and interacting with the attendees, they're like, what's my login? I can't get in. And yes, how many times did I that information. So we've definitely changed our communications around speakers leading up to the event. As many times as we tell them now 2 and 3 times extra, so that we're getting that, getting them in there comfortable with the platform so that they're ready to rock and roll on that first day.
Yes, that's something that we really found, particularly with the first one that we did. We're an industry where obviously we try and have new speakers, but we have quite a high proportion of speakers who are, how do I say this, of a certain age. And, they're quite set in their ways. And particularly if they do a lot of speaking opportunities, they're the equivalent of that guy that turns up 20 minutes before his session starts at the hotel with a USB that's full of embedded video files that he's not mentioned to you before, that he just has the AV person to sort out. He does his half an hour speech, he shakes a couple of hands and he leaves again. Those people, very difficult at virtual events because, like you said, Anissa, they don't read anything. And then they turn up 10 minutes before going, where am I supposed to be? How does this work?
Yeah, my favorite question. So what platform are you guys doing this on? And I'm going, what?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we found, again, like we did it with the sponsors and with the attendees, but we've done a couple of like webinars for speakers where we try and get as many of them confirmed at the same time. And then we say, like, this is, wherever you're at for this meeting, this is where it will all happen. This is what you need to think about. And, we'll do it a month in advance. So if they realize they need to buy a ring light or, their webcam on their computer is a bit crap, they've got time to sort it out.
Right, exactly.
My next question is, with virtual conferences, how is this working for extroverts compared to introverts? Is it better or worse, or what's your opinion on that?
I don't think it's necessarily, well, it's probably better for introverts, to be perfectly honest, because you can control what you consume and when you consume it. And if you need to take a break, you don't end up like hiding in the bathroom because you've had enough. You can just come back. So I think from a personalized experience perspective, virtual events obviously are better. I think for extroverts, they're the ones who take advantage of the networking opportunities perhaps slightly more. So it's an opportunity for them as well. I think being an extrovert in our current climate is, I think, probably quite challenging. So I think they both offer different opportunities and they're good for both sets of people as such, perhaps in a slightly different way to physical events.
Yeah, I agree. I laugh as somebody who's an extrovert myself. Like I'm just yearning to be back in person with people and in-person events. But I have noticed that, even like you said, introverts, they've had enough and they go hide in the bathroom. I mean, they have the ability to just turn off a camera. They don't want to be seen. They can not attend a mixer. I mean, they can pull themselves away and not be part of the conversation if they don't want to, and only add themselves where they want to. But like you said, the extroverts, they definitely, they're great. They're great for these networking events because they're the ones that will speak up first and kind of get the conversation going. But again, I think all of us extroverts, we're definitely looking forward going back to an in-person event.
I do think it also is interesting. I'm a off the chart introvert, and I do think it actually, it's the same thing regardless if you're an introvert or an extrovert. With virtual events, I do think you have to work harder, as we've been saying, to get people engaged. One of the things about being an introvert is you go to a physical event and a lot of the time, even if you don't really fancy it, you think, well, I'm there, so I need to pull myself together and just go and talk to some people. And once I start doing it, it won't be that difficult. And actually, I'll probably have a good time. Whereas virtually, that pressure isn't there. No one's really going to know if you don't engage. So it's easier. And this applies to everyone, not just introverts. It's so much easier to not get involved on a virtual level.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think it really goes to how you produce your content, is having lots of different types of content, lots of different times that it's available, on demand versus live, different opportunities around, maybe the same subject but presented in several different ways, all of that kind of stuff. And thinking about the engagement on virtual events is so important because, yes, you don't have that captive audience of people who've traveled to a particular place for 2 to 3 days for that very reason. Their company has spent a lot of money, and so they have that pressure that they've got to make the most of it. That pressure is kind of removed in a virtual world.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit of an introvert as well. And I think it's easier to do virtual events where, when you're at a face-to-face event and there's 300 people in the room and you don't know anyone, it's a little bit intimidating to try to go around and network, as opposed to the technology to network virtually from your desk or your office is so much easier for me and less stressful.
Yeah, I think so. You can also do more of it written as well. If you're not a very verbal person, you can message people backwards and forwards virtually, which works quite nicely in a way that, you're not going to WhatsApp somebody if they're in the same room as you at an event. Or maybe you would, but it's not necessarily the done thing.
Well, I know both of you had events that were always global, but did they become even more global when you went virtual with higher attendance and more outreach?
We found that the international mix of our attendees was higher virtually. And I think that will be a really interesting trend to watch as we go forward now into the rest of 2021 and 2022. What will happen with international travel and how willing people will be to internationally travel for business, I think is still something that's quite up in the air. And it's been a good thing for us in many ways. And I think, we'd hope that will continue. We are doing more and more virtually because, again, you have more flexibility around multiple different time zones over one event, so that we can, again, try and get that global audience in a way that obviously we wouldn't at a physical event.
Yeah, I would say a couple different things on that. For us, we have seen our attendance go up. One, with tickets, ticket prices are going to be cheaper for a virtual event because you're not having the cost of an in-person event. So we have seen, not just in the States, but of course globally, more people attend. But the other thing too is that people, especially those who, you talk about the cost of travel and everything, coming from, Asian countries, India, or even the UK to the United States, the ability to consume the content on demand, with in-person events. I mean, this year, for example, we've made the decision to go in person this year for our 2021 event in October, but we're going to do it as a hybrid. So what does that mean? Now I've put on, in-person events for years, and then I've done a year, now just about of doing these virtual events. And now I've got to find a way to marry the two, because we're still going to have those people that aren't comfortable with coming to an in-person event. So trying to find a way to give them that virtual event experience still, but being, at the comfort of their home or office. So it's nice for our global audience, because we're sitting here talking about global, is giving them the ability to get access to content that they may not have otherwise, because, they may have never come to the US for our event. So it's nice to get that additional audience.
I know with some of my clients, I had one that was medical conferences, and their volume, they got probably 500% the attendance once they went virtual, to be able to just reach out to so many more people that couldn't typically make their regional conferences. And I think it's going to be really interesting over the next 6 to 9 months as people really switch to the concept of a virtual event, where you do have the face-to-face coming back, but you also want to provide the content for the people that can't come and provide that virtual component. So I think it's going to be another exciting year of change for technology and utilization of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite interested. Anissa, it's probably a conversation not for right now, but I think hybrid events has become a bit of a buzzword, and I'm not sure. It's not something that I feel I have the answers to yet, because obviously one of the big challenges is that you can end up adding an enormous amount of cost to your event because you're live streaming and editing, and there's more equipment, more AV that's needed. And then, as you said, from a commercial perspective, generally virtual events are cheaper. So how you balance the added cost and the potential for extra revenue, I think is an interesting question. And there seem to be lots of different kinds of of hybrid event out there. But, the only ones I've really seen that have been touted as big successes so far have been the huge ones that are put on by people like Google and Facebook, who obviously have these enormous budgets. I think for people who have smaller budgets, how hybrid can work I think I've seen it described recently as concurrent hybrid, which I think is where you're streaming live, or sequential hybrid, which is when you're putting it up maybe somewhere between 6 to 24 hours after it's happened live. And that's a way of reducing your costs. So no, I think it will be really interesting to see how different people do it and what works and what doesn't on the hybrid front.
Agreed. This is our newest challenge, just when we think we've conquered in person and virtual, and now it's like we've got this whole new stage to put on. And that's what me and my team are actively working on right now, is what does that hybrid event look like with the streaming, with the producing the content and getting it on the platform later for people to consume. And then not just that, but how do I make my virtual audience and my in-person audience interact? So that's going to be another challenge. We don't want the people who don't come to feel completely alienated. Granted, they're not paying that extra amount to be there and maybe get that experience, but I still want to find a way to make them feel part of the conversation as much as possible.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about with the hybrid stuff. Similarly, I think there's still a lot to think about on the virtual front as well. Anita, I don't know if I imagine you probably are the same as us. We're finding that increasingly there's a bit of virtual event fatigue as well. So I think that's what I meant when I said at the start that technology has forced us to innovate. I think people in the events industry might be feeling that more than ever now, because when we just did physical events, it's not that we weren't innovating, but fundamentally you hire a venue and you kind of do a similar thing year on year. It's pretty unusual to sort of try and completely reinvent the wheel. Whereas with virtual, I think people have a lot less patience. And during the pandemic, people have a very clear idea of what it is they're prepared to commit to and what it is that they're just over it and they don't want to do it anymore. So I think the need to keep innovating and keep doing different things so that your engagement rates stay up. There's a lot more pressure there, but there's also a lot more opportunity because you can be so much more flexible in a virtual platform and in a virtual environment. So it's a kind of chicken and egg thing. There are advantages and disadvantages, but I do think that we will start to see people in 2021 trying things, new things and different things. Perhaps we weren't there in 2020. In 2020, most people were focused on, okay, I had my physical event. How do I make my physical event virtual? And it still resemble as closely as possible what my physical event would have been, so that people don't feel cheated. And I think we've moved on from that now. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think you hit on a great point there is, being innovative to maintain the engagement. I know a lot of event organizers I'm talking about are like, how do we make sure we don't have drop off and, keep the audience engaged when it's in a virtual platform? And as you said, they may be getting a little bit tired of just doing everything virtually right now. So what can you change up and do differently to, continue with the excitement into the audience for the content and the event?
Well, I mean, something that we tried in January that worked quite well for us is we would normally have a one-day show in Vegas around CES. And we split that out into a 5-day virtual event instead. But we had 2.5 hours of content a day, and each day was focused on a different theme. And our engagement over that week was 12% higher than our engagement was in 2020. So yeah, shorter amounts of content over a longer period of time seems to be working for us. But now we've also got the question of, another buzzword for 2021, I think, is community. And it's what's a virtual event and what's a community. And if you start doing content over longer periods of time, is that really just a community platform, but you're pretending it's a virtual event? Where's the line? How do the two work together? But that's a whole separate subject. So, Anissa.
That's funny that you're bringing it up like that, because that was a conversation we had internally, for our, what we're calling our micro events, our 1-day event versus our big event that we do three sessions of content. And we talked about it. Do we break it up and just kind of give those kind of snackables over a week's time? And that's what we were concerned with, is then we're losing that community engagement and having as many people involved at one time as possible, keeping them engaged into one space. I was thinking about it with something you just said a minute ago, or maybe Mark did, when talking about the engagement level of a virtual event. You're sitting at a computer, versus, being in person where you're captured in a venue. Well, sitting at a computer, it's easy to get sidetracked, especially all of us working from home. We may have kids as a distraction, or, emails that are coming in, or somebody pings you really quick because they have to ask you a quick question, and so you're not fully captured and engaged. And so it's I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think that's just another reason why people are looking forward to going back to these in person, because they want to be fully immersed into this content in this world, this community, without the outside distractions.
Yeah, I don't think people generally put out of offices on to say that they're going to a virtual event. They just have their email there and they go in and out. And that's, as you said, so you start to think, well, is one day enough? Or, can we do 6 hours of content concurrently and expect people to have the same level of attention? Probably not. But then, what does that look like when you break it down? So again, pros and cons around flexibility, and you can try a lot of new things. And at least with the virtual events, I think the really great thing is that you get the data to back it up. So you can be very empirical about, has this worked or hasn't it worked? How many people watched, how many people logged in, how long for? You have so much more information, which is a really big thing, obviously, for the sponsors. But as an event organizer looking to innovate, it gives you a lot more information to go on without having to survey your audience continually, because you've got that background information on their behavior in a way that you don't really at a conference. You might be badge scanning, you might have someone in the room counting how many people are in there at any given point, but you don't have the same level of insight into audience behavior at a physical event. So while virtual events are forcing innovation, they're also putting the events industry in a better place to be able to do so, because they're it provides a wealth of data that we just didn't have before about consumer behavior.
Yep, agreed.
I think the data is always important to be able to go back to the sponsors and show them the engagement and be able to track the ROI for their involvement with the conference. So that's always a really key point to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion today. And I think we can start wrapping up. But do either of you have any final thoughts or recommendations to the audience as far as best practices that you would recommend for 2021?
I think from me, it's I don't think you can really over communicate in a virtual environment. So whether that's with your clients, your delegates, your speakers, if you feel like you've done something and everybody gets it, you should probably do it again, because there's at least one person who didn't get it. And that is really the kind of the crux of it all. To make it work, you have to prepare. And it's not just about preparing your team, it's about preparing everybody who's involved. And that, I think, takes, it's not necessarily more work, but it's a different kind of work to physical events. And so planning that out is a really important part of it, I think.
Yep. So you kind of stole what I was going to say. So I'll just add on to that. No, I think it's great. I mean, I think it's great advice. And the thing I would add is, I mean, I know every event is different in how they, interact with their audience and how audience interacts with sponsors, speakers, whatever it may be. But just find what that one thing is for your event that keeps the conversation going, gives them the ability to network, because people love to share ideas, best practices. And so if they have a platform to do that or a space to do that, I think it's immensely helpful, because that's just one of those things that they get at an in-person event and they don't always necessarily get. Like I said earlier, I had the luxury of, talking to sponsors and speakers and attendees that have gone to all these virtual events. And one of the biggest things for them, or their complaint, was that, just the connection to other people. So that would be my advice, is find that way to do that for your audience.
Well, this has been fantastic. And I think your insights and your experiences from the last 6 to 9 months is going to be extremely beneficial to the audience here. And it's been a pleasure talking with both of you today, and really appreciate your involvement with the industry. And hopefully we'll have some better experiences this year as the vaccine rollout occurs and we do get back to face-to-face. I know everyone is getting a little stir crazy, and really looking forward to getting back to the new normal.
Yeah, I would like to stop having dreams about airports and actually just go to one. That would be nice.
Absolutely. And how great would it be to take this event or this session and expand upon it and actually do it live at South by Southwest next year in person and talk about how we've taken this virtual world into the hybrid world and back into person. So that'd be a fun topic.
Maybe we can rejoin in 2022 for that.
There you go.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you both for your time. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.